On the surface, Guild Wars 2's combat system is relatively simple, with plenty of similarities to other games in the genre. The UI is very intuitive, with a red health orb in the middle, an endurance bar above that, weapon skills and profession mechanics on the left, your heal, utility skills, and elite on the right, and traits are pretty simple too. You just pick 3 trait lines, and for each of the 3 tiers, you choose one of the 3 traits. Gear gives you the bulk of your stats, and you can upgrade your gear with runes and sigils, which give you a bit of damage or utility, whichever one you prefer. Where Guild Wars 2's combat system stands out from other MMOs is in the fact that nothing is set in stone. In a lot of games, you use skill points to unlock and level up certain skills, and you usually run out of skill points before you can max everything. In Guild Wars 2, you use hero points to unlock skills and traits. And if you unlock the wrong skill or trait, you can always go out and get more hero points. There's plenty to go around. However, this doesn't deprive you of the decision making you see in other games, because you can only slot so many skills and traits at one time. It's just that choosing which skills and traits to use is never a permanent decision, because you're free to change your skills and traits, and gear for that matter, whenever you're out of combat. When Heart of Thorns first came out, it received some negative reviews, mainly because ArenaNet made Heart of Thorns too difficult at first. In order to make you appreciate your glider when you eventually got it, they made the terrain difficult to traverse. In order to make you appreciate your new elite specialization, they made the enemies much harder than base game mobs. Aside from these obvious reasons, I believe ArenaNet had one other motivation for making Heart of Thorns so hard. More than anything, I think ArenaNet wanted to teach players this fact. Not only does Guild Wars 2 let you change your build whenever you're out of combat, it requires you to do so. Once Heart of Thorns beat me over the head a few times, I found myself changing my build for any situation that could benefit from it, including encounters from the base game. For example, I tend to fall a lot during this jumping puzzle, so I always use the trait that halves fall damage. To give you an idea of how often you should be changing your build, I'm now going to give examples of the sorts of builds you need for different situations. Special cases like jumping puzzles aside, an open world setting will either have you taking on enemies by yourself or working with a large number of people towards some goal. In these scenarios, you want to build for mobility and a bit of survivability, but you're mainly trying to maximize damage. When playing with large groups, you may want to support the group a bit, but you can honestly get away with anything if you're willing to be carried. You'll usually want to use gear that maximizes damage, and nab all of the traits, runes, and sigils that have percentage damage modifiers. All of your survivability should really come from your skills and traits, and maybe runes, instead of stats like vitality or toughness. Remember that you can change your build while out of combat, so if you ever see a scary group of enemies in the distance, just slot a stealth or invulnerability skill to get past them. The first time you really need to fine-tune your build is when you start 5-man content like dungeons and fractals. These encounters are designed for 5 people, and unlike open world group content, 5-man content holds you accountable for a fifth of your team's responsibilities, so you can't really expect to be carried. The basic idea here is that you take your open world build and maximize damage further by removing unnecessary mobility and survivability. You also want to build around the specific encounter you're going into and organize a proper team comp with your party. In general, you'd like to organize a way for your party to upkeep might, quickness, alacrity, and maybe healing. Some examples of encounter-specific build changes include the addition of stealth, reflex, condition cleanse, boon strip, pulls, or even extra mobility. As you can see here, I like to change my build while out of combat mid-encounter, just for this heat room. Depending on the encounter, you may also need some crowd controls for break bars. Enemies with break bars can't be crowd controlled, so they're unaffected by stuns, immobilizers, fears, etc. Instead, if the break bar is blue, your crowd controls will damage the bar, and once the bar is empty, the enemy will be stunned for 5 seconds, and will usually take bonus damage. Then, the bar will turn orange and slowly refill, during which time your crowd controls do absolutely nothing. Most enemies' break bars slowly refill while it's blue, so that's why you want to synchronize crowd controls with your party. You can change your PvP build anytime in the PvP lobby or at the start of a PvP match by just clicking the helmet at the top of the screen. Everything is scaled up to standardized level 80 stats, so you can hop in at level 1 with crappy gear. Because structured PvP pits you against humans, your build's essential elements will be different to those in PvE. You'll want some condition cleanse, stun breaks, escapes, and damage, and you'll have to avoid using slow telegraphed attacks because humans can just dodge those. Depending on your class, you may be able to include some gimmicks, like teleports, portals, interrupts, stuns, reflects, stealth, healing, condition transfer, etc, etc. Sometimes you have to give up some essentials, or make a choice between one gimmick over another. To figure out which, you should think about what role you want to play in your team comp. When forming a team comp in structured PvP, you want a good balance of the following roles. Bunkers, who can sit in a capture point and survive for ages. Brawlers, who do most of the fighting with good damage and survivability. Supports, who buff and heal teammates. Roamers, who travel around the map to decap enemy points and +1 even fights to turn them into their team's favor. And I guess assassins, who just assassinate easy targets. Of course, each player can take on a mix of these roles or even come up with their own weird niche. In this match, I'm playing as a roamer, so I start off by capping home and then heading mid to see if I can help. I quickly give up and decide to cap far. I need a lot of mobility for this, so I've equipped a short bow for the teleport on the 5th skill, along with the trickery trait line so that I have more initiative to spam the teleport. Raids are intended for 10 players and are meant to be the most difficult group content in Guild Wars 2 PvE at this point in time. All raids come with enrage timers, which basically force your team to finish the fight quickly. What this means is that unlike all other PvE content, you won't be able to finish a raid if you neglect DPS in favor of survivability. For your raid team to be able to deal enough DPS in the allotted time and also survive the raid, you need everyone to run near perfect builds. Exotic gear is okay, but Ascended is highly recommended because it's about a 10% damage increase. Raids are also when rune sigils and food start mattering a lot. Certain builds just can't do their job without the right stuff. For example, Chronomancers need boon duration on their runes, sigils, and food just to be able to keep the group's quickness up. Likewise, PS warriors usually need a sigil of strength to properly generate might. When setting up a raid team, you have to go through the same thought process as you would for fractals or dungeons. First, make sure you have people who can take care of the encounter-specific mechanics, like break bars or boon strips. Second, make sure you have enough healers, might and quickness generators, and a tank if necessary. The team also needs profession-specific buffs like Spotter and Banner of Strength. Third, try to fit all these requirements into as few team slots as possible, and then fill in the rest of the slots with DPS. While the second step wasn't too important in 5-man content, it's absolutely crucial in a raid setting because these boons and buffs can more than double your team's damage output. You usually want a mirror composition where your raid squad is split into 2 identical sub-squads because most buffing skills only affect 5 allies. However, some classes have profession-specific buffs that can affect 10 people, so you don't need 2 of them to cover your raid group. You can play World v World in a few ways. If you can't be bothered interacting with people, you can just walk in and run around, capping supply camps, babysitting objectives, or following a commander tag. In this case, you'd use a mix of your open world PvE and structured PvP builds, focusing on mobility and survivability, but also having the necessary tools for skirmishes with enemy players. If instead you want to play World v World with other people, there's a few things you need to consider. If you're playing in a small party, you play just as you would solo, but you now have the opportunity to organize synergies with your party members. If you're playing in a large squad, your commander will usually try to set things up like a raid, where boons are key. Typical things your commander could ask of you include buff stacking before engaging, crowd control to strip stability stacks off of enemies during fights, heals to keep your group up during fights, mesmer portals to transport golems, condition bombs and cleanses, and so on. An experienced commander will usually know how to distribute their squad into these roles. Well, that's it for now. Since Path of Fire has just been released, there will be a meta shift. However, you'll notice that most of this video didn't focus on class specifics and the ideas I mentioned will still be valid. If you like theory crafting, now is a great time to hop into Guild Wars 2 as people are trying out new builds and team comps. If you're a returning player, your favorite profession will be a bit different due to the expansions and balance patches. If you didn't have a favorite profession, maybe you'll have one now. Anyway, see you next time when I'll be talking about Guild Wars 2's endgame.